I'm an East Tennessean, you know, born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. Out on the north side, which was the poor side at the time, you know, the ordinary folks, just the working people, the blue collar folks on the north side. And my daddy was a railroad man, and I guess I always said that one day, you know, because of the railroad background, that I'd become a railroader too, and I did. But it took a long while to get up to that because in growing up in a relatively poor situation, we didn't travel. If we traveled anywhere, it would maybe to downtown Knoxville by a streetcar or.
Now, how far out of Knoxville were you?
Well, on the north side was about 6 or 8 miles from the downtown area. I lived right in Knox County, in fact. And my people, my background people, the Jetts and the Prevets on my mother's side were relatively close in that North Knoxville area. We all knew each other. In fact, my family knew my wife's family from way back, way before we were ever born. You know, they were that close in the neighborhood, particularly in the church that was in the area.
That's the Gillespie Church.
Gillespie Avenue Baptist Church. That my two grandfathers were members of the Broadway Baptist Church in the inner city part of Knoxville, but they had moved out some 4 or 5 miles, and at that time, getting 4 or 5 miles back and forth to church, you couldn't do it. Hardly you had to walk, you know, or if you had a horse, maybe. In fact, my father, the first transportation that I ever knew, my daddy had a horse and wagon. This was, I'd say, 1920, 22, something on that order. He had a horse and buggy. But people didn't get back into town to their churches, so these two grandfathers, and I think 2 or 3 others besides them, decided that they'd get Broadway Baptist to sponsor a mission church, and they did. They went out to that 5 or 6 miles from Broadway Church and set the church up, and that became more or less my family's roots. They all tied to that church, and it was more of a community at that time than churches are now. And that was a vital part of the community situation. And being born in 14, I think I mentioned in that paper that I do remember the armistice celebration in 1918. But what I remember about that, I guess about all I remember, right, is everybody who had a shotgun were out in the yard shooting shotgun. Didn't have firecrackers then, I don't reckon, at least we didn't know about it. But everybody had a shotgun, and they were shooting the guns off when the November 11, 1918 armistice was signed. The news didn't get out till 2 or 3 days later, you know. But I do remember that. And then growing up and going to grammar school in that area, where everybody in the community came in, I made a lot of friends in those grammar school and junior high days. And I just had an ordinary family background. I was disciplined. In fact, I was overly disciplined by my daddy. He'd whip me with a lath every now and then, a strip of wood, bang me good, and Mama standing there and said, "Edmund, don't do that. Edmund, don't do that." And I could hear him say, "He needs it. He needs it." and of course, I did need that kind of discipline, I'm sure. It it gave me pretty good understanding of how to handle a family. I made mention in that paper that my my mother was the most calm, peaceable woman that you could ever meet, and troubles, any kind of trouble, she would, almost like the ostrich with its head in the sand, she'd say, it'll go away, it'll go away. And most of the time, troubles do. But if you let them, they'll work themselves out.
And what kind of work did your father do?
He was a railroad man.
Yeah, okay.
He was a trainman, worked on the railroad, and during the early years, he started, I believe his seniority date started in 1917, before the First World War, and he worked part-time. It was more or less a wintertime job. In the summertime, there was less traffic on the railroad, and he'd get cut off and do odd jobs of any kind, most any kind, just to keep the payments on the house. And he did do that. Bought a house in 25. I remember moving from the rental place into the little new house that he bought for $1,500. And when my mother and father died later, I sold it for $7,500.
Do you remember what his payment was? Or?
Probably no more than $12 or $15 a month. In fact, it had to have been something like that, because the first house I bought in 1939, after we married in '38, I paid $2,500 for it, and paid $250 down and $25 a month. That was my monthly payment for that house. And my mother-in-law, Mariah's mother, said, you know, I can give you a pretty good financial statement. If you pay extra payments on your house, you'll get it paid for sooner and have to pay less interest. It worked out that way. You know, we took that advice, and if we ever got an extra penny, it went into that house until we got it paid for.
How was it heated?
The heating was grates, or any kind of stove that you had in the kitchen. Of course, they were just iron metal stove, and the front rooms, not many bedrooms had grates in them, but the front room had a grate in it, and you heated with that. The grate. Was it
coal or wood that you used?
Use coal. Use coal. Coal is a pretty good fuel up there in East Tennessee, because you're pretty close to the mountain. And we bought coal. I can remember buying coal for $6 and $8 a ton. A whole ton of coal for $6 or $8. But then that ton of coal, after we moved into our house, would last a month. So we pretty well heated the place for $6 or $8 a month. Now it's $600 or $800 to get gas, you know. But later on too, my daddy bought a Coke stove, that had a tube in it that you could pour that Coke in on that tube, and it fed down into the grate, and you could probably, as I remember, I finally bought one after my dad bought his and showed me that it worked. I could fill that thing up with Coke, and it would last 12, 15 hours, and keep the heat going out pretty good. It was just an ordinary stove, Coke stove, but we then heated with Coke, which is burnt up coal, you know. Still got good energy in it. And that's the way we kept ourselves warm in the wintertime. In the summertime, you kept yourself cool by all the windows up.
No such thing as air
No,
conditioning.
no such thing as air conditioning. That's right. And you were lucky if you could get a fan, you know, put 2 or 3 fans around. Finally got to where, when I went to work for the railroad, I had to do something about it, so I got a window fan. Put a window fan in the bedroom where I had to sleep. I worked all around the clock, out for 12 hours and come in for 18 or 20 hours. And many of those were daytime sleeping. I had to sleep at daytime with a window fan and with that air pulling over you. You didn't blow in, you pulled it out and pulled the air out of the house over you. So that was the only air conditioning we had at the time.
Now, coming up, did you have to contribute by working to the family household?
Well, I did that before I got married,
Yeah.
of course. I didn't get married until I was 22, and I lived at home until I was 20. Yeah, 20. I lived at home until I was 20. I went to work in a cotton mill, a standard knitting mill. Big knitted made underwear and T-shirts and such kind of wear. But I remember that was at 15 cents an hour. 15 cents an hour. And I worked 50 hours a week and got a check for $7.50. Of course, you didn't take any taxes out at that time, you know. But $7.50 before I was married, and I paid $3 of that a week for my board at home. And I stayed at home until I was 20, and then I moved to Chattanooga, to a mill in Chattanooga. My uncle, Lester Wilson, had moved there some 2 or 3 years before and was an assistant superintendent of a plant in Chattanooga, and he hired me for $14 a week, so I got a pretty good raise.
Now, was he the one that cried when you left, or was it the one you left
No,
from?
that was the one after I'd been with the mill for a little while, and I got no raises at all, and I went to Mr. Bailey. Man, Mr. Bailey was a deacon in the Gillespie Avenue Baptist Church, but he was the CEO. He was vice president of the mill, in fact, and he had hired me earlier at, I think I was 18 years old, just had turned 18, and was putting me through the mill to give me experiences of learning various parts of the mill, building me up to be some kind of a little straw boss, I think. And that was his intent. But I approached him about a raise too many times and got turned down, so when my uncle wrote me, he wrote then, you didn't telephone much then. Telephone was expensive from Knoxville to Chattanooga, so he wrote me a card back to Knoxville to the railroad when I went to work for the Southern Railroad. And then we got married. That's when I got married, when I got a little bit more money enough to take care of us, you know. And that lasted for 17 years, and would have been my lifetime career. I'd never moved if the good Lord hadn't been taking hold of my life all during that time. Later on, J.W., I had a pretty good voice, and I was singing with a quartet, country music. It wasn't country then, it was hillbilly. Country hadn't come in yet. Hillbilly music. Yeah. We were singing hillbilly music. I was playing a French harp, and two others in the quartet were playing guitar and a banjo. We were making bluegrass music before bluegrass came on the scene, but we didn't know it was bluegrass. And I was doing very well with that. We were doing jobs, little jobs. Maybe we'd get $25 for singing for a Rotary Club or going to a church and doing a big banquet or something, you know, that kind of thing. And my wife said, you know, you need to do more with your voice. You can sing. And I could. I'm pretty good, never had been trained at all. And so our choir director at the time at Gillespie Avenue, and we were members at Gillespie Avenue Church. My wife and I were both saved there and baptized there, grew up there, and our families were there, you know. It was a community type thing. And I said, well, I need to talk to Rayful Duncan, who was the choir director, about it, because he would use me every now and then to sing a verse of a hymn or something as a solo during the course of a worship service. And this was even before I went to work for the railroad. It got started then. But railroad became such a part of my life, I considered that would be all there was to it. But that music, I got started with a male chorus that Mr. Duncan was a member of. He got me to go, and I went with him to that. And the head of the music department in the city of Knoxville at the time, the city schools, and Knoxville was the director of the male chorus. He heard me singing, and he said, I'll give you voice lessons if you'll come to my church and sing at my church. He was director of the music at First Baptist Church at Knoxville. F.F. Brown. Dr. F.F. Brown was the pastor of the church, and he was at one time president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Well-known man in the area. So we decided to leave Gillespie Avenue and go to First Baptist Knoxville in order for me to get my voice started training. I sang there for 7 or 8 years, I guess. Yeah, 7 or 8 years, and finally got to be part of the paid quartet. Churches, big churches, like the First Knoxville and many of the first churches, had what they called a paid quartet. That is a soprano, alto, tenor, and a bass that they paid to take care of their sections in the choir. You know, the bass, which I was hired for, trained and helped to teach the basses in the choir while the other parts did theirs, and then we all came together as a choir. It made for a good musical arrangement. But I got to be the paid quartet of the First Baptist Church, and was a nominal Christian. I was saved. I knew I was saved, and was not a bad person by any manner of means, but I was just a hit or miss Christian. Other than that music, that's all I was thinking about. That was just about the extent of my religion at the time, my Christian activities at least. And I worked with, on the railroad, a deacon from the Lincoln Park Baptist Church out in the north side of Knoxville. And he said, our choir director is going to the seminary, and we need somebody to lead our choir and do our music at Lincoln Park. And I wanted to see if you'd be interested in that. Well, I said, yeah, let me think about that and pray about it. And I carried it home to my wife. We prayed about it, and I offered myself, and they called me. And we then moved our membership from First Baptist to Lincoln Park out on the north side. And the pastor of the Lincoln Park Baptist Church was a man same age as me. Charles Osmus was about the finest man that I ever knew. And he became my spiritual mentor. And, you know, in a touch here, touch there, touch here, touch there, talk about the music, talk about various things. And he finally said, you know, you got time to do a little teaching here in this Sunday school. You ought to be a Sunday school teacher. Well, I did. I took that on, And you know, the Lord was pumping me and prodding me all the time. You got more in you than you're putting out.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be doing more, boy. You need to be doing more. And you know, in 1948, it finally hit me that the Lord had more for me to do than a railroad. Although it was a good paying job, railroads made good money. And it was a good paying job, family all doing well, everybody growing. And in 1948, the Lord got hold of me in such a way that I couldn't refuse. I couldn't refuse. I got to where I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't rest, I couldn't do anything right. It seemed like. And it was the Lord hitting me, hitting me, hitting me. I felt like He was hitting me, you know. But He was prodding my mind and my heart and my spirit and my will. Till finally in 1948, underneath a giant tower in a railroad yard, I knelt down and I said, Lord, I'm going to turn my life over to you. Wherever you lead now, I'll go. Wherever you lead, I'll go. I knew, you know, that would pose an awful burden on the family, on what was left of my life. I knew it would be a radical change, a revolutionary change. So I went home that morning after I closed out my job, and Mariah met me at the door. She said, your breakfast is ready, come on in. And then I told her what I had done that night. And I never forget, she broke down weeping. And she says, you know, I've been praying for that for years. I've been praying for that for years. I said, well, honey, I did it. But you know, it's going to tear this whole family situation up. We're going to be in a new life. We're going to have to do something different. And I didn't know what to do. It was hard at that time. So my mentor, Charles Osmus, my pastor, I went over that day. I slept 2 or 3 hours and went over to see him that day and told him what I had done. He rejoiced. He rejoiced too. And he said, you got work to do, man. You got work to do, man. And I knew I did. I'd just graduated from high school years before, many years before. And he said, you need some further training. You need to go to school. And I began to think about Carson Newman, which was up 30, 40 miles from us, you know. But that got out of the question. I had to keep working. I had to keep working. And I couldn't work and go to Carson Newman to school. It takes an hour and a half to get up there, an hour and a half. Back then it took an hour and a half. Now you can do it in 30 minutes or less. But the time and the distance and the fact that I was out of town, all that involved. So Charles said, why don't you enroll in the University of Tennessee? And I said, well, I can do that. I maybe can do that. Take an hour or two a day or something. Take me forever to get through. He said, maybe you can do something about your job. And I went to see, and about a week from that, went to see the superintendent of the Knoxville division of the Southern Railroad, and he said, I can help you. I can transfer you into the yard, and you can work at night. He was a Christian. I told him what I'd done. You can work at night and go to school in the daytime. And JW, it took me 2 more years to get that all lined up, so I enrolled at the University of Tennessee in 1951, the fall of 1951, and started in school and worked at night. Didn't have 5-day week then, it was 7-day jobs. And However, I could lay off or get off nights every now and then, and they'd call somebody, a substitute, to fill in for me, like they do. And I started working at night and going to school in the daytime, 4 hours a day for the next 4 years, summers, fall, winters, springs, all year round. And I got my degree in 4 years, working at night. I had the kind of a job that I was in and out of a little concrete, what used to be a crossing watchman's shack. I don't know whether you ever saw them or not. They sat at a crossing and had a watchman there for many crossings in the town, and that they were no longer using them. They were going to the electronic arms and so on. So they'd move some of them into the yards, and I had one of those little old shacks that I stayed in about 30, 40 minutes at a time, and then I'd get out and work 30, 40 minutes at a time, come back in. I never did take a book home. I took my books to the concrete shack with an Aladdin lamp, and I did all my studying and writing and doing everything there for about 4 hours every night. Work 4 hours and off 4 hours. So I've always said that the Southern Railroad paid for my college degree. Well, that took a while, and it took some tall understanding and work from my dear wife. She worked with me every minute of the time and went with me anytime. If I had a burden or a problem or a difficulty, we prayed about it. If it came to making a decision about a class or time or anything, we prayed about it. We sought the will of the Lord, and thankfully He supplied it. He did whatever was necessary. And I had, when I got that college degree, Charles and I, Brother Osmus, Dr. Osmus, had worked it out with Sammy DeBoard. You may not remember or heard of that name, but Sammy DeBoard was a member of the Foreign Mission Board at the time, and he was located in Fort Worth doing a part-time church in Alvarado, Texas. And Charles had talked to Sammy, and Sammy said, if he wants to go to seminary, tell him to come out here and I'll get him a part-time job as a musician and education in a church so he can go to the seminary. So we worked that out. Worked that out to go in 1955 when I got my degree from the UT. And worked it out to go, but in the spring, March or April, Charles Osmus, my pastor and mentor, came down to Jefferson Avenue. Roy Hinchy, Roy W. Hinchy was pastor, to do a revival, preach a revival. And while Charles was in East Point, right? East Point, preaching that revival, Roy said, Charles, I need a music and education man. It's just the way he talked. That's the way he said, you know anybody that might fit that bill? Charles said, yeah, I got the very man you want. He's 40 years old and started to go to the seminary, but he knows already more than he needs to know to do your job, so call him. Of course, I needed seminary too, you know. And what I did there, JW, after I came to Jefferson Avenue, I worked out a correspondence course with Midwestern Baptist Convention in Kansas City, Kansas, and I got my 1 year of religious education worked out by correspondence, and also got my learning about how to handle education at Jefferson Avenue.
You learned a lot about Charles Flake, didn't you?
Well, he's the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Charles Flick's principles are still just as rich and wonderful as they ever were.
I agree.
We've got away from them.
Yeah, we have.
We've got away from them. Yes, indeed. That was the preamble of it all. And I learned.
Now, during the time that you were in school and working at the railroad, did you do church work at that
I
time?
was doing part-time music at
That's
Lincoln Park.
So you had a pretty heavy, pretty full plate, didn't you?
I, for 4 years, I didn't sleep 5 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I slept 5 hours a day. But you can do it.
You can.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't hurt. I didn't hurt. And besides that, you know, during the course of that time, that quartet that I was singing with back there still stayed in existence, and we still kept singing together and doing music at various places where we get a job.
Right.
Where we get a job. So it was a full 4 years. I don't know yet how I did it, but I did it. It was hard to leave the music field. I'd been in it full time for 10 years, and also part-time back there at Lincoln Park and First Baptist at Knoxville. And music had been so much a part of my life that leaving it was difficult. But I felt like that in the call that came, the way it was presented from Jefferson Avenue, that I'd come back as a Minister of Education and Administration, that it would be all I could handle. Already they had a good music man. Cole Scarborough was there.
I don't know him.
Cole was there at the time doing a good job. And I knew that there would be maybe a little friction, maybe from Cole or me in some situation, but both of us met before I made the decision, and I told him, I said, you know, if I were to receive and accept this call, I'll not fool with your music at all. I'll have no part in it other than to sing with you and do what I can to assist you every way I can. And excuse me, leaving the music field was hard, but it worked out. It worked out, and one of the things that worked it out, after I came back to Jefferson Avenue, Roy had O.M. Cates scheduled for a revival meeting at Jefferson Avenue. And I had worked with O.M. before when he was in Macon. He was pastor at Macon. And when he came to Jefferson Avenue, he said, you know, every now and then they call me for a revival someplace in this state, and they want me to bring a music man. Would you be willing to go with me some of those times? I said, you know I would. You know I would. And for the next 10 years, I made 25 revival meetings with O.M. Cates all over this state. All over this state. I worked it out with Jefferson Avenue. I said, you know, I'll catch my work up and be gone for a week, but when I come back, I'll pick it up again. And they said, well, it'll take 2 or 3 a week, 2 or 3 years. And that's what I did for the next 10 years. Over 25, I know it must have been at least that, may have been 30. I'm going to write it down one of these days, see where I went to revivals. And that more or less took care of the music feel in my mind and in my heart. But coming back as education and administration, it meant that I would deal with all the facilities of the church as well as the religious part of it, you know, mechanical and day-by-day operations and all the other, whatever it takes to do administrative work. And that's what I came back as, and fortunately and thankfully had a good time with it. Because when I talked to Roy about this matter of administration, I said, now Roy, I don't want to conflict with you anyway now. When you make decisions and so on, I said, I got to work with you on that. And he said, well, we can do that. We can work. And Brother Wallace, for those 10 years, I don't believe Roy and I ever had a crossword.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we ever had a crossword about anything. If ever there was a problem to deal with that had to be looked at by the pastor, I carried it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And if ever there was an administrative function that needed to be looked at on from my level, Roy and I talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We met together and worked things out. And when we went to the church for a business meeting, we worked together
Mm-hmm.
on whatever we went there with. And it worked out beautifully.
Yeah.
It was just a good time all the way around.
Now, was it after that that you went to Tennessee to do director of
I
missions? Or
stayed, no,
you did
no.
another step in there?
I stayed till 1973
Mm-hmm.
at Jefferson Avenue from 64 to 73 on my return. And in the spring of 73, well, in the winter of 73, one of the good brothers up there in Tennessee, a preacher brother, Brother Osmus, I've already talked about him, said, you know, Lawrence Trivett, our director of missions in Knox County, is going to retire. He'd reached the age of 70 and he said he's going to retire. And that'll be at the end of the year. He's going to retire December 31 of 1973. Yeah, 72.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to retire in December 72. And we're looking for a director of missions for the Knox County Association. And I wanted to present your name if you'd be interested. I said, well, I don't know about that, Charles. I feel like now, with my family and everything right here, I'm 60 years old. I don't know whether I ought to move or not. I'm set in solid. Well, about 2 weeks later, he said, you know, the Lord done told me you're the man for us up here. I said, well, Charles, I'm going to tell you like I heard you say some time ago about in one of his sermons. He said one of these wild hair preachers came in off the street and told me that he's supposed to come in and preach for me today. He said, you know, the Lord didn't call me to do that. He didn't tell me to do that. So I'm going to tell you right now that the Lord got to talk to me too. And he said, well, I understand. But you know, they kept pressing, and I kept thinking. In fact, I might have mentioned in that paper, Lawrence Trivett came to Lincoln Park while I was at Lincoln Park and supplied the pulpit one day at Lincoln Park, and I was leading the music. And he talked about the association, what the association was doing, what the hopes and the dreams were for the association. And I thought at the time, you know, I'd like to do that job. I'd like to do that job. And that thought came years and years before. Well, it came again during that spring of 73 when they presented their call to me. They did. They called me. And Mariah and I went back to Knoxville. We had kin folks up there by the dozens all over the place and knew the area, knew the people. We were part of the hillbillies culture. We were a part of the society. And we finally thought we can do it. And maybe that's the move we ought to make. And in the spring of 73, I turned in my resignation at Jefferson Avenue and went to Knoxville. And it hurt. It hurt because I was leaving too much of my flesh and blood right here. But it's still, I felt down in the deep of my heart, and my wife did too, that this is the move to make. Mm-hmm. So we went back to Knox County in the spring of 73 as the director of mission. 157 churches scattered all over from Gatlinburg to Rockwood, from Morristown to Athens, all in there. And I was on the road a good bit. I told Mariah, I said, you know, I'm going to be out of town a lot. I can't be in a church. I can't have a local church. She said, well, I'll go back to Lincoln Park. And so we both put our membership in at Lincoln Park. And she went there and taught all the years we were back in Knoxville. I taught a women's Sunday school class while I was out chasing 157 churches everywhere. And it was a good time, a good ministry. I thank the Lord for allowing me to do that, because I became the pastor to the pastors. I had 157 dear brothers up there that many of them had burdens and problems and difficulties and situations that they had trouble handling, big trouble, hard troubles. And I could get in there with them and help them with it. It was the most delightful way for me to wind up my ministry.
And you stayed there until?
10 years.
10 years.
Till 84.
To 84.
Yeah.
No, you were what age when you retired?
I was 68.
68. Would you do it any different? Would you continue working longer if you had it to
I
go?
don't think I would. It was time. It was time. You know, when you talk about the call from this place or that place, or this job to that job, there comes a time in your mind, and perhaps, and I know it's so, the Lord puts it there. He'll just tell you, it's time.
But I know,
It's the time.
I know you came back, but you didn't stop ministering. Tell me about what you've done in your retirement age. I know that you have been very, very active in ministry.
When I came back here in '84, I did move my membership back to Jefferson Avenue. Lived in Fayetteville, but my membership up there to Jefferson Avenue, just because of the deep feeling I had in my heart for the church. I told them when I preached up there back 2 or 3 months ago, I've joined this church 5 different times.
Now you remember there now? Is that where your membership is now?
Yeah, and I've been on the staff 4 times. That is, to count that pastor emeritus as being a staff member. I've been on the staff 4 times. But when I came back, I did supply work everywhere. I had brothers in the Atlanta Association call me and say, I need you to come and help me. Till '85, and the East Side Baptist Church in Riverdale, Norris Wilkerson was pastor there. Norris left in the spring of '85. I don't know where he went, somewhere in the Atlanta area, I think, but they called me as interim pastor, and I served 2 years. They wouldn't hunt anybody. They quit. They quit hunting for 2 years, and I finally said, you know, you all need a pastor. You need a full-time pastor. You need somebody on this field to where they can get in and out of these houses and neighborhoods and so on, and have a pastor. And so they called a man named David Two, T-E-W, I believe. Yeah, David Two. And I moderated his call. I moderated the meeting when they called him. And he came. Later, after he stayed 5 years and went off, I later went back and did another interim there at East Side, only about 6 months. But I then supplied pulpits and did revivals and did interim educational job too, and one was an association job down in the Elberton area, over in the Elberton area, and that was just part-time, you know. that Ilberton thing lasted 3 months, so I was over there 3 months. But I maintained my home here, and my wife stayed here, and I made that trip over time and time again, too many times. But in 89, I got a call from Ike Reichert. You know Ike. I got a call from Ike Reichert. Said, I just made acquaintance with you by talking to some former members of the Jefferson Avenue Church, John Hires, and his wife just had a stroke. Name escapes me right now. But two former members of Jefferson Avenue, and they told me that I needed to talk to you. Harry Smith, Dr. Harry Smith, who was the senior adult minister here at Jefferson, at New Hope, had a wreck over on New Hope Road, and he would not be coming back, and I need somebody to work with my senior adults. And so he said, how about letting you and me meet for lunch? So we met for lunch up at the City Cafe and Village Cafe in Fayetteville. And from that, I then became the senior adult minister at New Hope for the next 8 years. And of course moved my membership to New Hope, and that's where it stayed until we moved over here. And that too was a good ministry. It was a good ministry. I told them people, I said, yeah, I can relate to you because I are one of you now. And we had a good relationship for a little over 8 years. And Ike left, and they called a new man, and I told them then, before he came, I said, I'm going to get out because it's time. I was then 89. I was in 89. I'm going to get out there right now while I can. Before the new man comes, and when the new man comes, he can get his own man. And that's what I did.
I know the answer to this, but tell me how fulfilling ministry has been for you.
Great, great. I thank the Lord for every minute of it. In fact, at night when I pray, I thank the Lord for the fact that He called me into the kingdom. He called me into the kingdom, and it's been my life work ever since He called. I wouldn't trade places with anybody, the president or anybody. Every situation I've been in has been beautiful, wonderful. I've never had any kind of division or dissension at any time, I don't reckon. You know, I'm kind of like Roy Hinchy was. Roy said, if ever you see a problem, go take care of it right now. If ever you see a situation, go do something about it right now. And for these years, ever since I went into full-time active ministry in '55, I've tried to practice that. If ever I heard of any kind of dissension or division or problem or situation, brother, I tried to get to it.
Sort of an off-the-cuff kind of question. Can you think of any really humorous parts of ministry that just come to you? I know that you've got a wonderful sense of humor.
Well, so but, you know, when you want them, they don't come.
I understand that too. That's the reason I hesitate to even bring.
When you want them, they don't come. And I guess one of the funniest ones that I ever had, we had a member at Jefferson Avenue who's a deacon, in fact, Wallace Mobley. Wallace had a sporting goods store somewhere over in Atlanta. and sold sporting goods, all kind of stuff. And he did it to schools. He sold to schools, various schools wanted. And he did very well. Wallace Mobley, he was about that broad and wasn't over 5.5 foot tall, about 5'6", I bet. And he was almost almost an oval. And Wallace Mobley, one day, Roy had just finished baptizing somebody in the baptistry, and usually he either said the closing prayer, did it at the end of the service. Closing prayer, he called on somebody, and this Sunday morning he called out, said, "Brother Wobbly, would you lead us in prayer?" I heard somebody. First thing you know, the whole church was laughing. And Roy doesn't know yet what he did.
Yeah.
Doesn't know yet what he did.
Yep.
But I talked to Wallace after the service that morning. He said, "Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that." He said, he didn't know yet. He said that.
Well, was he able to get his composure and do the prayer okay?
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, no question about that. He did it, and when the service was over, I went out to the front door and met him coming out. I said, "Wallace, I hope you're not offended by that." He said, "Don't you worry about it." He said, "I know, Brother Henchy. I know, Brother."
And it's probably a story that he's told many times himself, too.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Well, there are some strange things happen. One time, wasn't funny. It was kind of funny, but it wasn't funny. I was at Will Meadows in Houston, and Ralph had preached the funeral that week, and had gone out to Forest Lawn there in Houston and buried the man. And Ralph used visual aids. He oftentimes would bring something into the pulpit and use it to illustrate his sermon. And then he was talking about having problems with handling death and so on. And he said, in the course of his sermon, we went out to Forest Lawn this week and did a burial, and they set the coffin down on the straps. And while I was praying, that coffin fell. And he jumped at me and said, fell just like that. And about that time, a woman came out of the pew and started out to the exit, running, and she got to the exit, and then another woman came out and started down, but she began to fall just before she got to that exit. And I was on the platform, and we were in outside in a gymnasium. That was where our worship service was at the time, and the platform was at least 3 or 4 feet above the floor of the gym. We had temporary chairs in there. And when I saw that woman start to fall, I jumped out of the seat and jumped down. I couldn't do it now, but I caught her just before she fell. Just before she fell. And she said, "I'm so ashamed. My foot went to sleep." That's my friend that just went out the door. And her husband had just been buried. And that's how come her to get up and leave, and it bothered her so.
Oh my goodness.
And that afternoon, Ralph called me and he said, I've got to go cover up something. I've got to go try to do something. He found out who that woman was, and he came by and picked me up, and we went to her home and visited with her. And she was grieving. She had just buried her husband about a week or so before that. And it got to her so that she just had to jump up and go. And Ralph said, "I got to cover that up best I can." So that's another one of those.
I know it's hard to probably sum up what your life has been and what you would like to say is your brand or your how you want to be remembered in life. But have you done that? A lot of people have.
The only thing I can say to that, Brother Wallace, is that I found out in all these years, I found out that if you take that thing to the Lord and really mean it, whatever it is that's out there, it's a situation or a program or a plan or a hope or a dream, carry it to the Lord first. Take it to Him first. Mention it to Him first. And if you want His help, boy, you get it. I think I've proved that with my life, how God has answered even the little things. Even after my wife began to fall apart 2 years before we left Fayetteville, her little old mind began to drift. She went into dementia. Never did reach the stage of Alzheimer's, dementia. And when she died in the hospice, they called it extreme dementia. But I could see that dear lady going down. And I prayed for help time and time again. And my Lord sent it. About those moves that I made over the years, from the boyhood events and carrying papers and caddying and working at a cotton mill and a railroad and now churches. If and when I sought the will of the Lord, I found it. And it had to be, as I look back, you know, many of your prayers are answered in retrospect. You look back and you see that they were answered. And the best advice that I can leave to anybody is, if you've got a program or a plan or a purpose, take it to the Lord first. I turned 4 years old. No, 3 years old. Just turned 3.
This is you. Now you have 2 children and how many
5 grands.
5.
And 11 great grands.
Wow. Beautiful children around.
My grandson's wife's mother and father, the in-laws of my grandson, who's also the grandfather of this little fellow, came down here about 6 months ago, and they attended my Sunday school class downstairs that I teach every Sunday morning, and brought him with them, and that's when they did. That's when they made that picture.
So you are teaching a Sunday school class here
Every Sunday morning.
Wow.
At 9:30. When I came here in little over 4 years ago now, Miss Johnson, who was the administrator at the time, said, you know, we need to start a Sunday school here in this place, and I'd like to ask you to do it. I'd like to ask you to teach it. And I said, well, Miss Johnson, I want to be a part of a church if I can. I don't want to tie myself up on Sunday morning. I want to go to church. And so, in March of that year, we moved in here in December. In March of that year, we joined the First Baptist Church at Fairburn. My wife and I both, we went up there and walked down the aisle and joined the First Baptist Church at Fairburn, thinking that we would go back and forth on Sunday morning, at least Sunday morning. To Fairburn Church was just 5 or 6 miles, you know. But 3 months later, she had another stroke, and it knocked her out from walking, virtually any kind of walking other than my help with a walker. And so then I said, well, since we can't get out of here on Sunday morning, I'm going to take that Sunday school class. So I believe it was in March. Yeah, March of 06. March of 06. I took the class, so I've been teaching it now for 4 years. And I've always said there, I have good attendance because they're captive. They can't get out. These dear people here, you know, they can't get out, so they come to my Sunday school class. And then I preach at Vesper service on the third Sunday every month. I preach at 4 o'clock downstairs in the chapel. And then once a month, on the third Monday, I teach a Bible class down in the chapel too, on the third Monday morning. So I'm busy. It keeps me busy. And you know as well as I, Brother Wallace, you can't depend on what you know from way back yonder. You got to keep it fresh.
Indeed.
You got to keep the stuff coming.
Yeah, you sure do.
Or you get stale. You get rotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rebecca at their high school graduation. Both of them graduated from Russell High School. Rebecca in 58 and Steve in 60. And of course you see great grandkids all over the place. They've taken that.
Yeah. Do most of them live pretty close by?
Well, no, yeah, all except two. These two, they live in Augusta.
Mm-hmm.
These two live in Augusta, and the others all live relatively close by. Carrollton, McDonough, Powder Springs. Yeah, Carrollton, McDonough, Powder Springs.
Now, which of them live in Carrollton? That's my home, is Carrollton.
Oh, is it?
I was raised there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest, Steve's oldest daughter, with 2 sons. These are all Steve's grandchildren. Steve's oldest daughter has these 2 boys right here. This is the oldest one. He's 16.
Mm-hmm.
Just turned 16. Don't want to lose this.
No, I'll pick it up.
That picture on the left right there is our 50th anniversary, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But when she died, we were just short of 3 months being married 70 years.
Wow.
That was her parents right there, her mother and dad.
Now, and they were in the same community you were
Yeah,
in?
in North Knoxville.
Now, were they in the Gillespie church
Both
too?
of them, all of them. The whole families.
Mm-hmm.
We go back way back
Mm-hmm.
in that Gillespie Avenue church. It runs all through that paper that I read.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's been a good church over the years and still doing very well.
I'm trying to think, was the pastor an uncle of yours?
J.K. Smith
Was your uncle?
Was my uncle by marriage.
Mm-hmm.
He married my mother's sister. He married us, baptized me, and I think he did my right.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he did. Yeah. Fine old gentleman. Knew the Bible better than anybody I've ever seen.
Well, I noticed you said he was your greatest theologian coming up, and this wall's just covered with all kinds of things that are precious. I know how precious they are. I just think that is wonderful.
Things appeared differently. He said his youngest daughter was sitting in his mother's lap, and she was then about 4 or 5, and this child was feeling her grandmother's face, feeling her wrinkles, you know, and she said, "Grandmother, did God make you?" And grandmother said, "Well, yes, he did." And the little child said, "Well, did God make me?" She said, "Well, yes, he did make you." He said, the child said, Well, how come he made your face with all those rough places in it and mine is smooth? You are holy people. You are Christians. You are sanctified. You're set apart. You're my people. And as those people were called Christians at first in Acts 7, we, my friends, are Christians. And as such, we are a holy people. And that world out there needs to see and know that we are his people. He has one more. I wish I could have left it one out, but he came. He said, you're a peculiar people. I tried to figure out over my years, 100 years, what did he mean by peculiar? Some of you are peculiar. Some of me is peculiar. I have to admit it, friend. No, I think what he's talking about, we are different. We are different. I've seen it. Not thankful. And I tell you, my dear friend, we've got so much to thank him for. Amen. That I can stand here all day and talk. I know that I'm grateful for who I am. I'm also grateful for who I am. I've heard the old cliche, but for the grace of God, there go I. They're out there, and I'm thankful to God. We're here today and not there. I'll tell you, my friends, we are in. I'm deeply in it. I'm so deeply in it. And I guess that's the reason he let me live so long. You know, I squandered 20 years on the railroad. If you waste some time, I squandered 20 years on the railroad. And the Lord let me live, make it up. I believe that's what he's doing. And I'm thankful. Oh, how thankful. But I go to the 10th verse, and it is called being a blessing. Being a blessing. I thought about that in one part. How do you bless God? I got to go back to my early days up in the hills of Tennessee. I heard of little Mount Hill preachers all out during their sermon. Bless God, bless God, bless God. And I thought, that being sacrilegious, how do you bless God? You bless God, my dear friend, by practicing all those 9 verses I just now quoted for you. Live and love and serve and be it, do it. And I go to Psalm 103, and I hear David say, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. I tell you, my friend, we can bless him by loving him. Bless him by loving him. Amen. That's my 10 verses. 8 verses. 8. But every song is about one of them in that book. It's got a chorus, and mine has too. And it's the 5th verse of that new Psalm 105. For the Lord is good, his mercy everlasting, his truth endureth for all generations. I'm going to sing that again. What do you want to hear? For the Lord is good, his mercy everlasting, his truth endureth to all generations. Amen.